Good evening. Retired four-star general and MSNBC and NBC News analyst Barry McCaffrey did not use the term, but judging by what he and his colleague, General Wayne Downing, reporting this evening, day one of the president's listening tour about Iraq might better have been described as open mic night. Our fifth story on the countdown, Bush in the bubble. Any number of publications reporting this week on the president's underwhelming response to the Iraq study group, and now the generals saying, in essence, that when they met with the president today, he essentially asked them only to give their own viewpoint. Mr. Bush's campaign of conspicuous consultation, taking him first this morning to the State Department, where he could at least appear to be seeking advice, even as evidence mounts that he is more convinced of his own certitude than ever, as reported in the New York Daily News. Mr. Bush telling a visitor to the Oval Office last week that he still believes history will vindicate him. His visitor quoting the president as having said, "I'll be dead when they get it right." According to U.S. News and World Report, Mr. Bush telling aides he would not be responding in detail to the Baker-Hamilton conclusions because he did not want to outsource the role of commander-in-chief. In the pages of the L.A. Times, the panel apparently grateful that the commander-in-chief gave them an hour of his time in return for the hundreds of hours they had devoted to the question of how to fix Iraq. If only the appearance of listening really were enough to fix Iraq.
I appreciate the advice I got from those folks in the field, and that advice is an important part and an important component of putting together a new way forward in Iraq. There's no question we got to make sure that the State Department and the Defense Department are the efforts and their recommendations are closely coordinated so that when I do speak to the American people, they will know that I've listened to all aspects of government and that the way forward is a way forward to achieve our objective, to succeed in Iraq.
In a meeting last week with congressional Democrats, President Bush said to have compared himself to President Truman, who, of course, launched the Truman Doctrine in a bid to fight communism before he got bogged down in the Korean War. Mr. Bush telling Illinois Senator Dick Durbin that only later did people realize Truman was right. This afternoon in Truman's hometown, in Truman's presidential library in Independence, Missouri, UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, in his final address in that role, warning the White House that being Truman-like is only valid when you do not abandon democratic ideals in the fight against terror.
Human rights and the rule of law are vital to global security and prosperity. As Truman said, and I quote again, we must once and for all prove by our acts conclusively that right is might. Right is might. That's why this country has historically been in the vanguard of global human rights movement. But that lead can only be maintained if America remains true to its principles, including in the struggle against terrorism. When it appears to abandon its own ideals and objectives, its friends abroad are naturally troubled and confused.
Let's call in our own Dana Milbank, national political reporter for the Washington Post. Dana, good evening.
Good evening, Keith.
We know Mr. Bush is planning to announce a new way forward based on all the other anecdotes about how the president has been reacting to the study group's report and this internal group day one. Should we be expecting any substantive changes? Is the White House still hoping instead that some sleight of hand and a few photo ops will suffice?
Well, the signs are not good. In fact, the president seems to be actively going out to solicit the views of people who are opposed to the Iraq study group recommendations, and there still are a few left. The one reason to believe that he will make substantive changes, even if not in the rhetoric, is he simply doesn't have a choice. You know, he started out with sort of an amen chorus here. That's dwindled down to the point where it's sort of an amen solo now with Vice President Cheney with his sort of raspy baritone doing it, and that's just not working for the country. The longer he keeps doing things the way it's working, the worse the situation will get in Iraq, and people realize that. So even to the extent he wants to keep things the way they are, reality forces him in another direction now.
There is a new poll out of Newsweek that shows Americans are backing the Iraq study group's recommendations 2-1, 39% in the survey saying they agree with the recommendations, 20% who do not. But the largest, or not the largest, but the most impactful, perhaps, number in there, the 26% who volunteered that they had not even heard that there had been a report. The question, I would guess, Dana, is that the segment of the American public the White House is counting on, maybe catering to, with this sort of highly publicized but maybe not too substantial response?
Oh, he doesn't have to worry about that. And that 26%, let's call it the Bill O'Reilly segment, they believe the war is over and we have won and we have found the weapons of mass destruction. So he can take them for granted, but he's got to do a lot better for the rest of the public. Now, let's realize that we have just had an election. The president has about a year till people start panicking until the next election. So it's purely a political matter. The president does have some room to wiggle and to wait this out and see what he's doing. But as a strategic matter, virtually everybody's advice says he has to act soon, and the longer he delays, the worse the situation inevitably becomes.
And the president spent an hour with the members of the ISG last week. He did not ask a single question, according to the former Secretary of State, Mr. Eagleberger. We heard the witness accounts today from General McCaffrey and General Downing that essentially they were asked, basically, what do you think? Does the president not know what specifics to ask, or is it a deliberate attempt not to ask anything specific?
I think it's more of the second of those choices. I had asked Eagleberger about that. He was surprised that the president didn't ask questions. He didn't think that it was a matter of detachment. I think what the president is known for is if you're saying something he disagrees with, he doesn't get in your face and start challenging you on it. He says, right, thank you very much, and then he just ignores what you have just said to him. That's his style. So the lack of questions implies, as many of the other signals the president has been giving, that he was not pleased with the recommendations he got from the Baker-Hamilton Commission.
And given the tendency of this White House to have used words backwards, to put it politely, and to invert meanings and such, how much faith should we put into the idea that because he's talking about a new way forward, that he'll actually present a new way forward?
Well, again, let's think about this. The rhetoric will be detached from the policy here, and as Don Rumsfeld said in his parting leaked memo, go minimalist, do this as sort of on a trial basis, so you don't appear to be switching strategies only for that to become a failure. So it is possible we're in a situation here where the president will do little on the rhetoric and a great deal with the actual actions.
Dana Milbank of MSNBC and the Washington Post. As always, Dana, great thanks.
Thanks, Keith.
The ISG co-chair, James Baker, telling a reporter last week that he would not be answering his question because it would require him to psychoanalyze or psychologically analyze the inner workings of the president's mind. Luckily, no such hurdle standing in our way tonight, nor in the way of Wayne Slater, senior political writer for the Dallas Morning News and co-author of Bush's Brain. Thank you again for your time tonight, sir.
Great to be with you, Keith.
What does it tell us about the state of the president's mind that he can dismiss the ISG report because he does not want to outsource the role of commander-in-chief without seeing any irony that he's outsourced just about every other aspect of the war and the administration, and the results have not exactly been good nor popular?
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy who instinctively, historically, has been able to look at a situation and say, where do I want it to end up? Facts be damned. And that's unfortunately where he is today. He's a guy who's looking at a box of options. All the options are bad. And so instead of picking one and dealing with it, he keeps looking for an option that's good. Psychologically, George Bush is in a position of saying, I want to get to a place in which not only will history vindicate me, which he told someone supposedly in the White House recently, as you said, but also a place where my legacy, the L word, legacy, doesn't say that I am a tragic figure and this was a failed mission. This is a president on the edge of a period in which the fundamental, most important decision of his presidency is wrong. Not only does he not believe that, he cannot afford to believe that in his own mind.
The LA Times article used the phrase bubble boy, as I observed. That's also in the Guardian. It's also again in Newsweek. The Times made the observation that the keys to getting Mr. Bush to do something are A, getting to him first, and B, you can't acknowledge that Iraq is a disaster in his presence. That would seem to make any new ideas about this subject, any plan that would amend a disaster, basically impossible. Is there a better hope than that? Than none? Is Slim still in town?
I think Slim is still in town, and it's ready to leave. If you look at structurally what has happened in this White House around George Bush, as governor and certainly as president, his method has been to surround himself with a small coterie of advisors. Now, some of these people could say things he disagreed with, but one by one, that small circle of voices, one legislator here in Texas once called the voices in the room and warned me to watch what would happen over the years in the White House. Would that circle of voices dwindle? You look at the group, Karen Hughes, once his biggest advisor, gone. Karl Rove proved to be mortal after all. The vice president, a man he relied on and has relied on greatly, has now been marginalized. Don Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, Richard Pearl, key figures in the war, now gone. Don Evans, his closest friend from Midland, vanished. He is now a person who is in a room with a small circle that's becoming smaller and smaller. In a sense, there's only a voice or two there now.
All right, and apart from that, is it possible that some of his reaction to the Iraq Study Group is the first name in that Baker-Hamilton connection, that it's because it's his father's Secretary of State saying this? Is there some, and again, we're delving deeply into psychoanalyzing a president of the United States while he's in office, but could this have felt like a trip to the woodshed by proxy?
You bet you it did, which is kind of an ironic thing, that you would bring in Baker, the guy who saved his hide after the 2000 race in the Florida recount, and now Gates, who was one of the daddy's boys. The idea that he would bring these in, and at the same time, I'm told that people inside the White House say, be very careful about passing the idea that daddy's pals are there to save him again. It irritates the president. It is not something he wants to hear. And so the idea that this man, who historically, over time, has always wanted to equal and outdo his father's enormous accomplishments, from pitcher at Yale to achievement in dealing with Desert Storm, is now in a situation where, as he once told me, it's important to be a consequential president. This president, now in trying to do better than the father, has proved himself potentially, in his own mind, to being a consequential president, but the consequences may be enormously bad.
Yeah, make sure you make specific those wishes about consequence. It's supposed to be good consequence. Wayne Slater, co-author of Bush's Brain and the architect. As always, great thanks for your time tonight, sir.